Broadcasting from Washington, D.C., this is Insider's Guide to Energy.
Welcome to Insider's Guide to Energy. I'm your host, Chris Sass. And today we have an exciting show. We're going to talk to the CEO of Monta. Welcome to the program, Casper Rasmussen.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Looking forward for the conversation today.
I am looking forward to having this conversation. You and I have been trying to talk for some period of time. There's so much going on in your world. Your company's been going through some growth. It looks like funding and all kinds of great stuff. So it's been hard. I'm glad we finally have time to have this conversation. I have a good idea of what the background is, but why don't we start out for the audience as to what it is your company does?
Yeah, so Monta is a platform for EVs, like EV charging. So we are really just a technology provider building software end to end in the charging ecosystem. So connecting ChargePoint to our cloud solution and providing services around that. So that's payment, authentication, load management, grid services, etc., etc.
So that is something that everybody would like. I think the only company that kind of started that journey was Tesla, where they kind of had that integrated story, but any other vehicle doesn't have that. Are you trying to fill that void, or are you looking at other pain points?
So I think for us, it really started with like the user experience of charging. That was the pain point which dragged me into it. So this have to be easier to solve. And then as we started building for that, we understood that the infrastructure actually behind it all also needed a full rethinking. So we just went deeper and deeper and deeper into to all the problems and ended up building like a really big project. And maybe 1.5 years ago, we started looking into the grid as well. That was part of our plan all the way through to prepare ourselves for vehicle to grid one day. But we kind of we identified this part of the grid where you can provide flexibility, ancillary services. So we're aggregating charge points today, and then you are bidding on flexibility market, meaning that if the frequency drops below a certain percentage, you will have to react and pause charging. And that's been like really a big journey building that up and managed to launch that over the summer and going very well now.
So the FCR is kind of interesting to me as a fundamental technology. So you did this past summer some trial, right, in Sweden and Denmark with how you could do that. So are we talking now? These are like private B2C customers that you were doing this with, or were this just fleets that you were doing this with?
So in theory, both segments could sign up for it, but it was opt-in. So we just made it as a program. We want to sign up here, and then you get some of the revenue we are earning. And then was in DK. In DK2 is the bidding zone connected to Sweden. So that was the starting area. Yeah.
And then the concept had to do, if I'm not mistaken, with since you control the amount of demand, that's part of the problem statement, but then the frequency as well. So what exactly do you do to bring value to the grid?
Yeah, exactly. So because we are charging so much, like in peak hours here in DK2, we're charging something like 50, 60 megawatt. Um, and if you look at how much that is compared to the total grid spend, it's a good percentage now. So we aggregate all that, we forecast the demands, and then we go out to the TSO and bid on flexibility. That way, we say from this hour to this hour we can provide 500 megawatts. From this hour to this hour we can provide 200, and then they will pay us for that flexibility. When there is an event, then which is averagely happening every 6 weeks, we will have to act within 5 seconds and pause charging. You will have to hit a specific curve of downscaling, and as well when the frequency is back up, you'll have to hit a curve back up so you don't overshoot on the frequency. So it's a fairly technical thing to get to build, especially across thousands of charge points. That's where it gets really advanced.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, the scale of this, right? So if you suddenly were to have a single switch and shut everyone off at the same time, that would probably be more disruptive than not doing anything or suddenly
Mhm.
turn all the demand on at the same time. So is that part of the complexity of why the value of this is so important?
Yeah, so like th- I think what you're talking about here is like if you overshoot, which is the frequency drops a little bit, and now we pause way too much, and then now the frequency goes above. So part of the whole algorithm is that we're actually measuring the frequency as we're reducing it, so we make sure we don't overshoot. So we go in and say, let's say we have 500 assets in rolled into that hour, and we are asked to drop to pause, then we will pause 100 right away. We will measure the frequency again, pause another 100, etc. So it kind of so you hit the curve for getting the frequency back in play. So that's what makes it advanced. It's not just switch off right away.
And now you talked about the region this started in. So your company is in a number of countries now. It seems to be growing throughout Europe. I think I've seen you in Spain. I think you have offices in London and all over. Is the technology and the charging experience that you're developing universal across the EU yet?
So for are we talking on the flexibility market or generally the charging software?
Well, I think your platform, right? I think you were going into the flexibility market seemed to be a newer emerging thing for you, if I
Exactly.
understood.
Yeah, so the platform itself runs in we're live now in 16 countries, where 10 of them we are like have offices in. So in theory, the platform is pretty easy to move across borders. There is some localization we'll have to do often, depending on what the local laws are. Have to adjust to the currency, the getting access to data, spot price market, CO2 levels, etc. So we go at the countries one by one and make sure that we can build up all the feature sets for it. We often also will be a reseller of electricity, so we'll have to register a company and go through a small legal process. Um, yeah.
And then how does this process scale? Are you planning to be a regional European player, or can you go into other markets such as the US, which has a very different structure for its ISOs and energy market?
Yeah, so the plan was to start here in the Nordics and Central Europe, where the EV adoption was most rolled out, and then we went into Southern Europe last year, and next year the plans are to get set up in US, and US is a few years behind the Europe now on EV adoption, also how mature the laws are. The 50 states are doing a little bit different, but it's actually most of the things we've seen in some country in Europe along the way, where you're not allowed to sell kilowatts unless you're a utility, but you can sell minute parking while you have free charging, and like there's workarounds to some of them. So we see it as that is really like 50 small countries, and you need to understand what you can't do in each.
And personally, your background, I think you came from an app background, you came from other tech companies. How does that roll into doing what you're doing today?
Yeah, so my background is originally an electronical engineer. I moved into software and then built mobile apps for a decade. Had a company where we sold software mobile apps primarily in Europe. More than 500 apps was developed over 10 years. So it gave me a lot of the experience in mobility and in consumer software, which was needed here. And then my original background as an electronical engineer have given me some insights, of course, to how the hardware works. So yeah.
And then the app or the platform, maybe you can explain a little bit more about how that works and what the value proposition is from each of the perspectives, right? I think you mentioned the utility, you mentioned maybe the consumer, like where, the charge point stations. How does that bring value across the chain?
Yes, of course. So we categorize the different segments a little bit, but if we start with if you are a charge point operator, and that would be if you want to put 4 charge points up at home or at your business or housing association, then we have a end-to-end platform for that. So you sign up and you go in and create your profile, your account, set up the site, put in the 4 charge points. We can integrate into more than 450 different charge point models. So if you're bought ABB, Schneider, Siemens, etc., that will work. Then you set it up from there. You decide what is the price. Is it public? Do I want it to keep it privately? Who do I want to invite in of your colleagues or friends? And then you really have the platform to run charge points. In this case, it's just four, but often a lot of the charge point operators start small and then they get to hundreds and thousands later. So it's very much the same feature sets there. Um, if you if you are EV driver, then we have the charge products, which is primarily around mobile app. So if you are at one of our charging stations, you can scan a QR code. It will take you either into a direct payment, or you can download the mobile app, create a profile, and there you can always find all the charge points. We have like 600,000 charge points in the platform today. So you can find them everywhere in Europe and start them and pay. But you can also manage your own charge point at home. You can do smart charging. You have full insight of what you spend at home and what you spend at on the road.
Does it
And then we
provide
have
visibility into the reliability of the charge point or any statistics? I know one of the North American problems is you there may be a charge point, but you get there and it doesn't work, or it's occupied, or there's other challenges with it. Does the app help you navigate that challenge that folks are experiencing here, at least in North America?
Yeah, so the state of the charge points is visible, of course. So if it's occupied and it's an error state or disconnected, etc., you will see that. We have been playing around with what we call like a reliability score. So trying to merge and aggregate a lot of data on how it's been performing lately and show that for the user. So how likely is this to work when you come? And that's definitely something we want to explore more of. The same also with pricing, show you like, is this actually a fair pricing compared to the charge points in the area? Um, yeah.
And how does that work? So, if you have a petrol car, I can pretty much universally just drive by a service station and look at the pricing on the sign and know what I'm paying. With
Mhm.
electricity, it's a bit different. So, are people using the app to help control that cost? Is that where I'm looking, the
Yeah.
rates, or how is that working today?
Yeah, so in Northern Europe now, we have a pricing system we call dynamic pricing, where it actually follows the spot market, and you also have tariffs based on the DSO, TSO, etc. level. So the price changes every hour. So that's even when you start the charge point at, let's say, €1, it might be 1.1 1 hour later or less. So to really have full insight to what the charging price will be, you'll have to look into the mobile app. Um, if there's payment terminals at the site, which we are starting to see more and more, that they put these small terminals up, when you activate them, it will estimate how much the price will be for you, depending on the price over average charge. But the full overview is in the app.
And is that a problem today, or is that, since there's visibility, not a problem? Is that drivers getting uncomfortable with that, or are they comfortable with understanding how this works? Because it seems you need to be a little bit more understanding of the process than perhaps of the old days.
Yeah. So I completely agree that this can easily be done way better for the end consumers. I think if we look a few years back where there was not dynamic pricing, that meant that the CPOs was adding a lot of extra costs to the kilowatts to make sure that they were always on the good side, meaning that we were paying like 3-4x what the energy price was often when charging on the streets. So I think it's a better alternative, but it's still not perfect. In the perfect world, there will be a small display on the charge point telling you right now the kilowatt price is this. This is how it's going to evolve. That's it got part of the specification now on the open protocols called California pricing in OCPP. So we will see more of this going forward. Few of the European countries have already warned that all charge points installed after 25 or 27 will have to have some kind of mechanisms like this to be fully transparent on pricing. And then you should be able to see accumulate price as you're charging. So you can also quickly see if the price is off.
Prices off. Now, you mentioned that you're growing fairly rapidly. You talked about some of the nuance of going to each markets. What is it that the company's focused on now? It sounds like you have the base platform pretty well baked. It sounds like that you've been expanding that. What's your focus now going forward?
So the focus at the moment is that we've been building up the platform and are getting that into a very good position now. We still believe there's a lot to be solved in the industry. It's a lot different problems when we have X thousand charge points, 10,000 charge points, 100,000 charge points from a technology point of view, but also from a operator point of view. It's much harder to operate thousands of charge points. You need to know what charge points are broken, how do we send technicians out, like the whole operational thing gets much more important. But also internally at us, like we need to be much better at making sure that solution is running smooth end to end through the entire experience, so people don't have to call our support or chat with us. So it's really operational. We're spending a lot of energy here at the moment on scaling and improving quality. There's some major changes in the industry at the moment. There's the protocol OCPP is getting upgraded, which is a very big migration. We're seeing plug and charge getting rolled out. We've done the first iterations of that and live in the product as well. So there's plenty to work on from a technology point of view. But scaling the entire thing up is getting complicated as well.
And then this day and age, you can't talk about technology without talking about AI. Is AI changing what you're doing, or is their evolution of what's happening in your platform because of advances in AI?
So with AI is not taking a big portion of the time yet. There's the fundamentals needs to be solved first, like the data contracts, the data flows between everything. What we have done on AI so far is spot price prediction, so we can forecast 7 days ahead, which means smart charging for our customer gets even better than just knowing what the price is going to go ahead. Besides that, we use it a lot internally. It's used a lot in our support. It's helping our support agents answering tickets, talking to our customers. It's giving the engineering team a lot of help, the marketing team. But yeah.
So I guess the one thing that comes to mind when you have a platform that you're describing is, are you competing for who owns the customers? Are the OEMs and everybody else a bit concerned about having a third party platform? Because it seems like you own the relationship with the driver when you have the platform they're using to do all their charging and maintaining. Is
Mhm.
that a challenge for your business model?
It's definitely something we've been challenged on. I would say we started doing that to make sure that we could kind of control our own fate, but we have been partnering up a lot with different companies in all over Europe, where they are getting more in control of the customer relationships as well. So we're in a hybrid model today, where in some countries we are very focused on our own brand, and in other countries we are working with partners.
And then what's the customer journey? What's their life expectancy? They normally sign up with you at their first EV, and the plan is that they just continue to use the app. Is that kind of the journey you're expecting?
I think that we look more at it as like running the software on the charging station. That's the sticky part. If we get in there, then we see a very loyal relationship with the customer. If it's a pure EV driver which are browsing around to find charge points and starting them, there's a lot of competition on pricing, and that's not necessarily our play as well. So we believe more on running the charging stations is our game.
And then from the charging station point of view, or the charge point point of view, how different is it from country to country within Europe?
In technology wise, what do you mean?
Yeah, and technology of having a platform that runs across 12 countries or across
Yeah.
multiple footprints.
So the fragmentation of hardware is massive, right? We have 450 different models supported today. We have a full team only working on getting charge points into the office, opening them up, making sure they work, test them out. And then from that point, then you see different countries are implementing different laws. we have seen in the dark region, Germany, Austria, with ISRIS, which have been fairly painful process to get that implemented end to end, where we are encrypting meter readings through hardware to the cloud and having to work with the hardware providers on the firmware side as well, which is a different different release cycle than building web and apps. In France, they have this like small gate which needs to close down in front of the connector. That's not impacting us, but it's impacting all the hardware manufacturers. They need to make a model just for that. So we see variations from country to country, but most of it is just a very big spread on hardware at the moment.
And then from your company point of view, how big is the company? Where you guys at?
We're 200 employees today.
Wow. And are you in growth mode? Are you fairly stable right now?
We are very much in growth mode. I think there was 10 new colleagues this month, and continuing something like that going forward. Yes.
Where do y'all do most of your development? Where do your developers sit?
So we have two hubs for the engineering today. So here in Copenhagen, there's a fairly big R&D team, and then in Berlin, there's 25, but around 90 people in R&D today in the company.
Have you seen the current interest rates and world economy impact the deployment rate of these charge points? Has it made a difference in the last 12 months?
I think it's more been these like incentives locally where the governments are rolling something out and then rolling it back again, and where we can see that like it's changing in the market over a quarter. But I think luckily for us, we have a very good spread across Nordics, DACH, and UK Ireland. It's almost like a quarter of our revenue comes from each. So when one country is going a little bit slower, another one is picking up. That's been like how it worked this year.
And I guess, is there a need to track green energy coming out of these charge points? Is that something that you would be a part of, or would that be just the charge point operator?
No, so we are using a service today which are giving us CO2 levels and energy sources from the grids at that point. And we're using that for two things. We use it to obviously show the user how much CO2 they generated from that charge, but it's also when they do smart charging, you can pick between price, CO2, or renewable sources, and you can kind of make a profile for how much you care about each, and then we decide based on that profile when the right charging schedule should be.
And are people using that feature? Has that been fairly heavily used in your applications?
Smart charging is very much used. I would say more than 90% is setting it to price, but we can see in certain areas where the tariffs are not fully dynamic, there we see more people setting them towards renewable energy sources and low CO2. So it is used, but I think it's more about showing the customers how they're like giving them the option to make that decision.
And then, does your software help even demand out for the utility of the charge point by directing folks to other locations, right? So that you're kind of balancing that way as well, besides just consumption.
No, we have decided to build in a way where like we can show the customers where there's occupied charge points and where they're free, and we have a queuing solution. So if you're driving to a site where everything is fully occupied, you can join. You can see the waiting time and join a queue, and that's been our kind of place on this. I think some of the other things you can start working on is kind of having these like when is it normally busy and not. But what we have seen is like it's just a very big spread on how charging stations are utilized depending on seasonality, weather, which is not that easy to predict. So we've stayed out of that for so far.
And then, I guess, with your crystal ball, where is this going? What functionalities and features do you think change this platform and going forward? What do you see you want to add to make this better or different?
I think personally, I'm fairly excited about the whole OCP2, where that is going, because it's a big problem of the industry today is that we're deploying a lot of charge points on fairly weak technologies. So strengthening the whole backbone will just make it much more robust for everyone. And we're looking very much forward for moving in that direction. Plug and charge, or like the whole auto charge, where you just put the cable in, the Tesla experience. We are rolling that out since August here in Denmark now, and it's been a game changer as well. You just plug in the cable and everything is taken care of right away. I think on the grid side, there's a lot of more to come here. It's opening up in UK now as well. We're starting to see a lot of the hardware manufacturers are thinking in the feature sets and the firmware to be able to make this possible. So I think that's what we see, a lot of evolution. And then we have just decided to also start spending some energy on some time on heavy duty. So the trucks are coming now. There's not that many, but it's a little bit checking the egg as always. And we want to lean in to make sure that there's charging stations and software for that. A lot of it is the same technology, but they can't share charge points with privates. And this entire roaming setup today, where we are sharing charge points to each other, needs to be rethought a lot. They also need to know about what is the dimension of the parking, so they know if they can come in with a 45-ton truck with two trailers, or they will have to detach, which is of course suboptimal. So that's some new efforts next year.
So you talked about the hardware connecting to your platform. Are there other platforms that you interact with or need to offer this service? Software platforms that are in existence?
Yes, our dependencies on the platform today, besides hosting, that is like payment gateways. We use a few of them. We have payment terminal integrations as well. We are communicating on the roaming setup, so we have something 50 something direct connections, and then all the roaming hubs. Data to spot pricing, that's Nord Pool in most market, but there's a specific one in Ireland and Spain. The whole CO2 and energy sources is another source, so plenty of dependencies and data getting thrown back and forth.
Is there a fair amount of variability that maybe you don't see in a conventional internal combustion engine from a supply side? So if there's a holiday or things like that, since electrons generally don't store well, um, is this different? Is there a learning curve based on the demand being kind of? I mean, it stores in the car battery, but I would imagine that demand is different. Is that the case or not really?
I think the biggest one is really when the temperature drops, we can see charging going up drastically. Like here, the last few days here in the Nordics, we had snow and minus temperatures, and then it just increased drastically. And then I think like most of the EV drivers today, they don't really spend too much time at the fast chargers. They only use it in the holiday time when they need to visit family, and there you can see a big move going from destination charging to fast charging. So I think that's the clear patterns we see today.
And so, does that mean that a lot of weather data is part of your prediction then for the markets, for your market data, or are you just relying on the markets for that?
So on our whole spot price prediction, weather and specifically wind around the windmill parks in the sea is a very big portion of the prediction. Yes.
And then, does that hold true for the DACH region or other? I mean, in the UK or somewhere that's got a lot of wind and coastline. Does that hold true through all through the countries you're in?
Definitely not, right? And that's also the complexity. Each almost each bidding zone will have different kind of parameters you need to pull in, which is important for predicting price. And then you just have some of these completely or impossible things to predict when suddenly Germany starts buying up energy in DK1 and not using it, or other like hedging and other interesting elements we have seen.
So now COP28 is going on. Is there anything that should be coming out of the COP conference that you think will impact your business?
I think that the thing I'm always talking about is like everyone is so focused about these public fast charger networks around the highways in every country. And for sure, that is a network which needs to be set up for EV to be rolled out. But it's such a small part of the problem. Like destination charging is just what everyone is going to use eventually for most of the charging. Um, and it's getting too little attention in the start in all countries. And then when EV adoption gets to 5, 10, 15%, it starts going over to destination charging. But it's the private market doing it really. It's not getting too much attention from the governments.
But is that a reasonable assessment with, I mean, so many Europeans live in apartments. They don't own their homes, so they're multifamily dwellings.
Yeah.
How does that work? I think you would notice it at a certain point, right? Because EVs tended to be expensive. So the early adopters tended to be more affluent and maybe had
Mhm.
separate homes. Is when it's mass market, is it still all going to be destination? How does someone that lives in apartment buildings have enough charging for everybody?
So what we see is just that they will be able to install charging poles on the street on the curbs. All the parking houses around the town will just get charging poles on every single charge parking. So this is the solutions. We don't need super fast charging if you're parked there for 12 hours plus. So 3.7 kilowatt one phase. That's actually enough as well. But then just needs to be charging stations enough, so you don't need to worry about it when you get home from work. Um, and it's really solving the problem. But then the pricing needs to follow as well, so there's not a big gap if you're living in an apartment and have to buy it on the public market, or you're living in a townhouse where you can put the cable out of the window and charge yourself from your own energy bill.
Makes sense. Now, I have a background coming from telecom, and I know that everything in scale was hard. That's what made telecom hard because we had to do it in such scale. Have you started seeing the scale that you're hoping for, and what kind of challenges for your particular software does scale bring? So when density gets very high across all of Europe, what are some of the scaling issues for this kind of software?
So the first one is this OTP protocol I was talking about. That is actually like a steady WebSocket connection you have on all the charging stations, even when they are not active. Um, and that's not something you can just buy off the shelf at Amazon or Microsoft in their cloud hosting, at least not in scale. So you need to spend a lot of engineering power kind of rethinking how these things are done. And we went through a lot of that work maybe 1 year back. So completely separated up, like what we call the OCP broker and the layer, which are actually dealing with the calculations. So you can keep the connections going at a very steady pace. Otherwise, whenever someone redeployed, you were just rebooting 50,000 charge points, which are then all reconnecting back at the server and taking it down again. Um, and then I think the best thing to compare to roaming to telco, that's roaming. Where today it's a hybrid setup between roaming hubs where it's centralized, and then you have these bidirectional OCPI connections the big operators are doing with each other. And neither of these are going to scale very well. And I think this industry needs to learn a little bit from 20, 30 years of telco, where you have the large ones connecting to each other and the smaller ones connecting to the larger ones, etc., etc. So it's not like one to many problems happening for this. Yeah.
And is the network infrastructure in place for all this as you're going in and adding this? Is this going to be taxing on either 5G or on the land network?
So we're tapping onto the normal internet, right? So it can be eSIMs or SIM cards, Wi-Fi, LAN. That's a setup you're seeing today. Um, but I think my point is more about like how we get the data back and forth between the operators. So it's not a centralized solution through some provider, but it's also not completely decentralized where everyone needs to know about everyone at all points, because that also gonna be problematic in scale. It's only going to be Amazon or Microsoft having a good time over that.
Awesome. Well, we've been all over the place. Before we come to a conclusion, are there any other things that I didn't cover that you would like to talk about before we bring this interview to a close?
No, I think we really covered some territory today. So appreciate that.
I really appreciate you coming on Insider's Guide. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
For our audience, we hope you've enjoyed this content. If you found it insightful, don't forget to subscribe, share it with your friends, and add comments on the comment field. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.